The first gunshot came as a warning, but the second stole Penelope Morgan's future as surely as the thieves stole her wagon. Standing in the middle of the dusty road leading into Santa Rosa, California, Penelope watched helplessly as her entire life packed carefully in a covered wagon disappeared over the horizon, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small handbag clutched in her trembling fingers. It was 1871, and Penelope had traveled all the way from Boston to start anew after her parents' passing left her with debts she couldn't pay and memories too painful to relive. Now, just 2 miles from her destination, she had lost everything. Her mother's silver, her father's books, clothes, supplies, and the deed to the small parcel of land she had purchased sight unseen. Tears stung her eyes as she stood alone on the road, the setting sun casting long shadows across the California landscape. At 25, Penelope had believed herself strong enough to forge a new life in the West. Now she wondered if she'd been foolish to try. "Miss, you all right there?" The deep voice startled her. Penelope turned to find a man astride a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with the fluid ease of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. "I've been robbed," Penelope said, her voice steadier than she felt. 3 men. "They took my wagon, my belongings, everything." The man pushed his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes as blue as the California sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and shoulders that spoke of hard work. "Name's Daniel Yates," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Ranch is just over that ridge. Sounds like you've run into the Barrett gang. They've been causing trouble all through the county." Penelope took his hand briefly. "Penelope Morgan. I was headed to Santa Rosa to claim a property I purchased." Daniel Yates looked down the road where her wagon had disappeared, then back at Penelope, noting her city clothes and the determined set of her jaw despite the circumstances. "Well, Miss Morgan, seems like you've got 2 choices. Wait here hoping someone comes along who might take you into town, or let me escort you to my ranch for the night. We can alert the sheriff in the morning." Penelope hesitated. She'd been raised to be wary of strangers, especially men, but something in Daniel's straightforward gaze made her believe she could trust him. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Yates, but I wouldn't want to impose." Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Out here, neighbors help neighbors, Miss Morgan, and it looks to me like you're planning to be a neighbor." He gestured to his horse. "Rusty here is strong enough to carry us both to the ranch. It's not far." With few options and night approaching, Penelope nodded her agreement. Daniel helped her mount before swinging up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as he reached around for the reins. As they rode toward his ranch, Penelope felt the warmth of his chest against her back and tried to ignore the unfamiliar flutter in her stomach. This was merely a matter of survival, she told herself. Nothing more. The Yates Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. "It's not much," Daniel said near her ear, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Penelope replied honestly, admiring the neat property. It was smaller than she'd imagined a ranch would be, but well-maintained. As they approached, a young boy of perhaps 12 rushed from the barn, followed by an older man with silver hair. "You're late for supper, Danny," the boy called, then stopped short when he noticed Penelope. Daniel dismounted and helped Penelope down. "Robbie, this is Miss Morgan. She's had some trouble on the road." "Miss Morgan, this is my brother Robert, and that's my foreman Ellis," the silver-haired man nodded respectfully. "Madam, Miss Morgan's wagon was stolen by the Barrett gang," Daniel explained. "She'll be staying with us tonight," Ellis frowned. "That's the 3rd robbery this month. Sheriff Tanner needs to do something about those boys." Daniel nodded grimly. "We'll ride to town first thing tomorrow. For now, let's get Miss Morgan settled." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and doors leading to what Penelope assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was sturdy and practical, with a few touches that hinted at a woman's hand in the past curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt folded over the back of a rocking chair. Our mother died 3 years ago, Daniel explained, noticing her gaze. It's just been Robbie and me since then. And Ellis, of course, he was my father's friend, stayed on after Pa passed. I'm sorry for your losses, Penelope said softly. Daniel shrugged. Life out here doesn't always give you what you want, but it provides what you need. He gestured to a closed door. You can use my mother's room tonight. I've kept it as she left it. After a simple but hearty supper of beef stew and biscuits, during which Robbie peppered Penelope with questions about Boston, Daniel showed her to the promised room. It was neat and feminine, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Ellis's wife, Martha, comes by once a week to dust and air things out, Daniel explained. There should be a nightgown in the drawer that might fit. My mother wasn't much bigger than you. Penelope felt a lump in her throat at his kindness. Thank you, Mr. Yates. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Daniel, please, and don't worry about your things. We'll do everything we can to get them back. Alone in the borrowed room, Penelope changed into the simple cotton nightgown and slipped beneath the quilt. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she worried about her future. Without her wagon and supplies, how would she establish herself on her land? And the deed itself was gone, though thankfully she had sent a copy to the land office in advance. The next morning, Penelope woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in yesterday's travel-worn clothes and found Daniel in the kitchen, cooking breakfast while Robbie set the table. Good morning, Miss Morgan, Daniel greeted her. Hope you slept well as could be expected, thank you. She moved to help Robbie with the table settings. And please call me Penelope. Daniel nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. Penelope, then. He slid eggs onto 3 plates. Ellis already rode into town to alert Sheriff Tanner about the robbery. We'll head in after breakfast to see what's being done. The ride to Santa Rosa took less than an hour. The town was larger than Penelope had expected, with several streets of businesses, a church steeple rising above the buildings, and people bustling about their morning routines. The sheriff's office was a small building on the main street. Inside, they found Ellis in conversation with a stern-faced man wearing a tin star. Sheriff, this is Miss Penelope Morgan, the victim of yesterday's robbery, Daniel said. Sheriff Tanner nodded, his expression softening slightly when he looked at Penelope. Madam. Mr. Ellis here was just filling me in. Can you describe the men who took your wagon? Penelope recounted the robbery in detail, describing the 3 men as best she could. They took everything I own, Sheriff. Is there any chance of recovering my belongings? The sheriff sighed. The Barrett boys are slippery, Miss Morgan. Been chasing them for months, but they usually sell their stolen goods to a fence in Sacramento. I've sent telegrams to the authorities there, but I can't promise anything. What about my land? Penelope asked anxiously. The deed was in my wagon. You said you purchased it from Joseph Miller. When Penelope nodded, Sheriff Tanner continued, the land office should have a record of the sale. We can check there next. The land office confirmed Penelope's ownership of 10 acres just outside town, previously part of the old Miller orchard. With a copy of her deed secured, she felt marginally better, but the reality of her situation remained dire. The land has a small cabin, the clerk explained. Basic but sound. Miller built it for his son before the boy decided to try his luck in the gold country. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Daniel turned to Penelope. Well, that's something at least. You've still got your land. Yes, but nothing to work it with, Penelope said, trying to keep despair from her voice. No tools, no seeds, no supplies. Daniel studied her face. You were planning to farm the land yourself. My father taught me about horticulture. I was planning to establish an orchard eventually. There's good demand for fruit. She smiled wryly. I had it all planned out, right down to the last detail. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Plans change, but dreams don't have to. He looked toward the general store across the street. Let's see what we can do about getting you some supplies. Inside the store, Penelope was overwhelmed by the cost of replacing even the most basic necessities. Her remaining funds were meant to sustain her until her first harvest, not to start from scratch. Daniel seemed to sense her distress. Mr. Peterson, he called to the shopkeeper, Miss Morgan here needs to set up housekeeping. She'll be taking some of these items on credit, and I'll be guaranteeing payment. Penelope turned to him in shock. Mr. Yates, Daniel, I couldn't possibly— What's mine is yours, Penelope, he said quietly. At least until you get on your feet. We help our neighbors here. His kindness nearly undid her. In Boston, such generosity would have come with expectations she couldn't meet, but the straightforward way Daniel made the offer without pretense or conditions told her this was different. I'll pay back every cent, she promised. With Daniel's guarantee, Penelope was able to secure basic supplies: tools, seeds, some foodstuffs, bedding, and a few cooking implements. It wasn't nearly what she'd lost, but it was a start. As they loaded the supplies into Daniel's wagon, which Ellis had brought from the ranch while they were at the land office, Sheriff Tanner approached them. Just got word from Sacramento, he said. They caught one of the Barrett boys trying to sell some stolen goods. Nothing identified as yours yet, Miss Morgan, but they're holding him for questioning. That's something, at least, Daniel said. Keep us informed, Sheriff. With their business in town concluded, they set out to see Penelope's property. The 10 acres were about halfway between town and the Yates Ranch, with the small cabin situated on a gentle rise overlooking what had once been an orchard, but was now overgrown. The cabin itself was sturdier than Penelope had feared, one room with a stone fireplace, a small window, and a door that latched securely. It would need cleaning, but the roof was intact and the walls solid. It's better than I expected, Penelope admitted, trying to sound optimistic as they unloaded the supplies. Daniel watched her face carefully. It's a rough start, he said, but I've seen people make homes with less. Ellis, who had accompanied them, cleared his throat. If you don't mind me saying, Miss Morgan, it's not safe for a woman alone out here, especially with those Barrett boys still on the loose. Penelope felt a flash of defensiveness. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Ellis, but I'm tougher than I look. No doubt, Daniel said, but Ellis is right. Until the sheriff catches all of those thieves, you'd be safer staying at our place. The cabin will keep until then. Part of Penelope wanted to refuse to prove she could manage on her own as she'd planned, but pragmatism won out. Perhaps just until the thieves are caught, she conceded. I wouldn't want to impose longer than necessary. Daniel nodded, though something in his expression suggested he had more to say. They secured the cabin and headed back to the ranch as the afternoon waned. Over the next few days, Penelope found herself settling into life at the Yates Ranch. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over cooking and mending, and even helping Robbie with his reading lessons in the evenings. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, tending to his small herd of cattle and the few crops he grew to feed his household. A week after the robbery, Sheriff Tanner rode out to the ranch with news. They'd caught all 3 Barrett brothers, but most of the stolen goods had already been sold or traded away. Among the recovered items were Penelope's mother's silver hairbrush and a few books that had belonged to her father. I'm sorry there's not more, the sheriff said as he handed over the small bundle. The wagon itself was sold to a farmer near Sacramento. We know who has it, but he paid fair price not knowing it was stolen. It's complicated to get it back. Penelope clutched the recovered items to her chest. Thank you, Sheriff. At least I have these memories of my parents. After the sheriff left, Daniel found Penelope on the porch, looking out over the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson. It's a beautiful land, she said as he sat beside her. It is, he agreed. My father chose well when he settled here. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Penelope spoke again. I'll move to my cabin tomorrow. The Barrett brothers are caught, so there's no reason for me to impose on your hospitality any longer. Daniel turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. You're not imposing, Penelope. Robbie's taken to having you around. The boy hasn't had a woman's influence since our mother died. And you, the words slipped out before she could stop them. Daniel's gaze held hers. I've gotten used to seeing you at my table in the mornings. The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. Nevertheless, I need to start establishing my own place. I've already delayed longer than I planned. Daniel nodded slowly. At least let me help you get settled. The cabin needs work, and there's land to clear if you're set on planting those fruit trees. I can manage, Penelope insisted, though the thought of tackling the overgrown orchard alone was daunting. I know you can, Daniel said, but you don't have to. The next morning, Penelope packed her few belongings, the recovered items from the robbery, and some clothes Martha Ellis had brought for her, hand-me-downs from her daughters who had married and moved away. Daniel insisted on accompanying her to the cabin, bringing tools and additional supplies. The cabin seemed smaller and lonelier than Penelope remembered. She tried not to let her disappointment show as she swept out the accumulated dust and arranged her meager possessions. Daniel worked outside, fixing a loose board on the small porch and clearing away some of the encroaching brush. When Penelope stepped outside with coffee she'd made on the small wood stove, she was surprised to see he'd already cleared a significant area. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, handing him a cup. Daniel took a sip, appreciating the strong brew. "I told you, neighbors help neighbors." "I'm beginning to think California neighbors are exceptionally helpful," Penelope replied with a smile, "just doing what my father would have done." Daniel set down his cup and picked up his axe again. "Speaking of fathers, you mentioned yours taught you about horticulture. Was he a farmer?" Penelope settled on a stump, watching him work. "He was a professor at Harvard, botany. We had a small garden where he experimented with different varieties. He always dreamed of having an orchard, but Boston wasn't the place for it. So you're fulfilling his dream." "And mine," Penelope said softly. "After my parents died of influenza last year, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. The creditors took almost everything to settle my father's debts. I sold what remained and decided to start fresh somewhere completely different." Daniel paused in his work, leaning on the axe handle. "That takes courage, or desperation," Penelope said with a wry smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Daniel resumed chopping, the rhythmic sound filling the air between them. By late afternoon, he had cleared a significant area around the cabin and marked out where Penelope could start her garden. As the sun began to set, he reluctantly prepared to leave. "I don't like leaving you out here alone," he admitted as he loaded his tools into his wagon. "I'll be fine," Penelope assured him, though the thought of the empty cabin behind her was less than appealing. "Thank you for all your help today." Daniel hesitated, then reached into the wagon and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "Martha sent this for you. Said every home needs something pretty." Penelope unwrapped the package to find a patchwork pillow made from colorful scraps of fabric. "It's lovely. Please thank her for me. You can thank her yourself on Sunday. We'd like you to join us for dinner after church." Penelope felt a rush of warmth at the invitation. "I'd like that." Daniel climbed into his wagon, then looked back at her. "If you need anything before then, the ranch is just over that ridge. You can see the roof from the high point on your property." "I'll remember that." As Daniel's wagon disappeared down the road, Penelope returned to her cabin. The silence was profound after days in the bustling Yates household. She tried to focus on the positive: she had her land, a roof over her head, and the beginning of her garden marked out. It was more than many had when starting over. Still, as she prepared a simple supper on her small stove, Penelope couldn't help feeling the vastness of the task ahead of her. Clearing the land, planting an orchard, making this tiny cabin a home, it had seemed achievable when she had her wagon full of supplies and tools. Now, she wondered if she'd been foolishly optimistic. That night, lying on her newly acquired bedroll, Penelope clutched Martha's pillow and tried not to think about the comfortable bed at the Yates ranch, or the sound of Robbie's laughter, or the way Daniel's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The next few days established a routine of hard work from dawn until dusk. Penelope cleared what she could of the overgrown land, prepared a small vegetable garden near the cabin, and made the interior as comfortable as possible with her limited resources. On her third day alone, Penelope was struggling to dig out a stubborn root when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Looking up, she was surprised to see not only Daniel but also Robbie and Ellis, along with 3 other men she didn't recognize. "Hope you don't mind company," Daniel called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Mentioned to some folks in town that you were clearing land for an orchard. Turns out a few people remembered your father's articles in those farming journals. They were eager to help." The men introduced themselves as neighboring farmers, each with their own small orchards. They'd brought tools, saplings, and knowledge to share. By midday, they had cleared twice the area Penelope could have managed alone, and one of the men, Mr. Richardson, was explaining the best placement for different varieties of fruit trees. "The soil here is good," he told Penelope. Old Man Miller knew what he was about when he started his orchard. Shame his son didn't have the same interest. "Their loss is my gain," Penelope said, surveying the transformation of her property with amazement. By late afternoon, the first dozen saplings were planted apple, pear, and cherry trees that would eventually form the core of her orchard. The men refused payment, accepting only Penelope's promise to share the bounty when the trees finally bore fruit. As the neighbors departed, Ellis took Robbie back to the ranch, leaving Daniel behind. He stood with Penelope at the edge of the newly planted section, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I don't know how to thank you," Penelope said, still overwhelmed by the community's generosity. "Seeing that smile is thanks enough," Daniel replied, then looked slightly embarrassed by his own words. "Besides, everyone's curious about the Eastern lady professor's daughter who's determined to start an orchard on her own." Penelope laughed. "I suppose I am something of an oddity." "You're certainly unlike any woman I've met before," Daniel agreed, his tone making it clear this wasn't a criticism. As the sun began to set, Daniel helped Penelope carry water from the nearby stream to tend to the new saplings. Working together in the golden light of early evening, they fell into a comfortable rhythm, their conversation flowing easily from practical matters to more personal topics. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Penelope asked as they filled the last of the buckets. Daniel considered the question. "I wanted to see more of the world when I was younger, even thought about joining the army for a while. But after my father died, there was the ranch and Robbie to think about." "Do you regret staying?" "No," he said without hesitation. "This land gets in your blood, and family is family." Penelope nodded, understanding the pull of duty and love. "Your parents would be proud of how you've raised Robbie." Daniel's expression softened. "He's a good kid, smart too, smarter than me, that's for sure." "Don't sell yourself short," Penelope admonished gently. "Intelligence comes in many forms. The way you manage your ranch, how you've built relationships with your neighbors, that takes a keen mind." Daniel looked at her with surprise, as if unused to such praise. "Most people around here just think of me as Joseph Yates's boy who never left home." "Then most people aren't paying attention," Penelope said firmly. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect and perhaps something more. Daniel cleared his throat and picked up the buckets. "Better get these to the saplings before we lose the light." That Sunday, Penelope joined the Yates family for church services in Santa Rosa. The small white clapboard building was filled with familiar faces, the neighbors who had helped with her orchard, the shopkeeper who had extended her credit, and other members of the community she was gradually getting to know. After the service, several people approached to introduce themselves, curious about the newcomer and her orchard plans. Penelope was touched by their interest and support, so different from the reserved social interactions of Boston society. Dinner at the Yates Ranch that afternoon was a lively affair, with Martha and Ellis joining them. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Robbie's enthusiastic questions about Boston and Penelope's travels. "Did you see any bandits before the Barrett boys?" Robbie asked, eyes wide. "Robert," Daniel admonished, "that's not appropriate dinner conversation." "It's all right," Penelope assured him. "And no, Robbie, I was fortunate that the Barrett brothers were my first and hopefully last encounter with bandits." "Sheriff says they'll be going to prison for a long time," Ellis added. "Judge is coming through next month for their trial." After dinner, while Martha and Ellis washed the dishes despite Penelope's offers to help, Daniel suggested a walk to show her more of the ranch. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the fields and pastures as they strolled along a well-worn path. "You've made this place thrive," Penelope observed, noting the healthy cattle and the neat fences. "It's smaller than when my father ran it," Daniel admitted. "Had to sell off some acreage after he died to pay debts, but what remains is good land." "Sometimes smaller is more manageable," Penelope said. My 10 acres seems vast enough when I'm trying to clear it alone. Daniel glanced at her. You know, I could help more often. The ranch keeps me busy, but I could spare a few hours here and there. You've already done so much, Penelope protested. I can't ask for more of your time. You're not asking, I'm offering. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. The truth is, I enjoy spending time with you, Penelope. The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through her chest. I enjoy your company too, she admitted. Daniel took a step closer. Then let me help. Not because you need it, but because I want to be there, see your orchard grow, see you make that cabin into a home. The sincerity in his blue eyes made Penelope's heart beat faster. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he simply offered his hand. Partners? He asked. Penelope placed her hand in his larger one, feeling the strength and gentleness in his grip. Partners, she agreed. As spring progressed into early summer, Daniel became a regular presence at Penelope's property. True to his word, he helped when he could spare time from his own ranch duties, bringing Robbie along on occasion. The boy proved enthusiastic about the orchard project, absorbing Penelope's knowledge of horticulture with keen interest. Penelope's cabin gradually transformed into a home. A proper bed replaced her bedroll, curtains adorned the window, and shelves Daniel built held her few books and treasures. The vegetable garden flourished, providing fresh food for her table, and the saplings took root, promising future harvests. Word of her orchard spread, and occasionally other farmers would stop by to offer advice or bring cuttings of different fruit varieties. Penelope kept careful records of each planting, mapping out her expanding orchard with the scientific precision her father had taught her. One warm evening in June, as Penelope and Daniel sat on her small porch watching the sunset after a long day of work, she realized how completely her life had changed in just a few months. The loss of her wagon and belongings, which had seemed catastrophic at the time, had led her to connections and community she might never have found otherwise. Penny for your thoughts, Daniel said. Using the nickname he'd taken to calling her, Penelope smiled. I was just thinking about how losing everything turned out to be the beginning of something better. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Life has a way of doing that sometimes, taking away what you think you need to give you what you really need. And what do you think I really needed? Penelope asked, curious about his perspective. Daniel looked at her, his expression soft in the fading light. The same thing most of us need to belong somewhere, to matter to someone. The simple truth of his words touched her deeply. I think you're right. In Boston, after my parents died, I was adrift. I had acquaintances but few true friends. Here I've found both. And more, Daniel asked, his question hanging in the air between them. Penelope met his gaze. Yes, she said softly. More. Daniel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I've been wanting to tell you something, Penny. These past months, watching you build your place here, seeing your determination and strength, it's made me realize what I've been missing. Penelope's heart quickened. And what's that? A partner, not just someone to share the work, but someone to share life with. Daniel's voice was low and earnest. I know it might be too soon. You're just getting established here, and I don't want to complicate things, but Daniel, Penelope interrupted gently, turning her hand to clasp his. Nothing worth having comes without complications. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. Is that your way of saying you might consider complicating your life with me? Instead of answering, Penelope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his a brief, soft kiss that nevertheless conveyed her feelings clearly. When she pulled back, Daniel looked momentarily stunned, then delighted. I take that as a yes. Yes, Penelope confirmed, feeling a happiness she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. Though I should warn you, I'm still determined to make my orchard succeed. Daniel laughed. I wouldn't expect anything less. And I'll be right here to help those trees grow strong. He paused, then added more seriously, I don't have much to offer, Penny. The ranch is modest and there's Robbie to consider. Robbie is part of the package and I adore him, Penelope said firmly. As for having little to offer, Daniel, you've given me more than you know already. When I was standing on that road watching my wagon disappear, I thought I'd lost everything. But meeting you, Becoming part of this community, I've gained something far more valuable than anything that was in that wagon." Daniel drew her closer, his arms strong around her shoulders as they watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. "What's mine is yours," he said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken in the general store months ago. "And what's yours is mine. Your dreams, your orchard, your future, I want to be part of all of it." "And I want to be part of yours," Penelope replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The ranch, Robbie, everything." They sat together as the first stars appeared, talking about possibilities and plans, dreams shared and futures entwined. The courtship that followed was by necessity a practical one. Daniel continued to help with Penelope's orchard while managing his ranch, and Penelope split her time between her own property and assisting at the Yates place. Robbie took to calling her Miss Penny and eagerly soaked up her lessons on plants and science. By late summer, the arrangement evolved naturally into a more formal understanding. Daniel proposed properly one evening during a community dance in Santa Rosa, taking Penelope outside under the star-filled sky and offering her his grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it comes with all my heart." "It's perfect," Penelope assured him, tears of joy in her eyes as he slipped it onto her finger. When they announced their engagement to the community, no one seemed surprised. Martha Ellis declared she'd known from the day Daniel brought Penelope to the ranch that they were meant for each other. "The way he looked at you when you weren't watching," she told Penelope with a knowing smile. "A woman recognizes these things." The wedding was planned for October, after the busiest season on the ranch, and when Penelope's garden would be harvested. The question of where they would live afterward was resolved with practical compromise. They would split their time between both properties, gradually expanding the cabin on Penelope's land to accommodate the family while maintaining the Yates ranch. As summer transitioned into early autumn, Penelope found herself busier than ever. Between preparations for the wedding, tending to her expanding orchard, and helping Daniel with ranch responsibilities, days flew by in a blur of activity. One afternoon, as she was picking late tomatoes from her garden, she heard the now familiar sound of Daniel's wagon approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see not just Daniel but Sheriff Tanner as well. "Afternoon, Penny," Daniel called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Sheriff has some news." Penelope wiped her hands on her apron and approached the wagon. "Sheriff Tanner, this is unexpected." The sheriff nodded in greeting. "Miss Morgan, thought you'd want to know they caught that fence in Sacramento who was selling your stolen goods. He had a few more of your things that hadn't been sold yet." Penelope's heart leaped. "What things?" "Mostly books and some clothing," Sheriff Tanner replied, "but also this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Penelope took it with trembling hands. Inside was her mother's wedding ring, a delicate gold band with tiny diamonds set around a sapphire. She had thought it lost forever. "Oh," she breathed, eyes filling with tears. "I never thought I'd see this again." "There's more," Daniel said, his expression excited. "Tell her, Sheriff." "That farmer who bought your wagon, turns out he was feeling guilty about it once he learned it was stolen. He's offering to return it if you'll reimburse what he paid. Less than half what it's worth by my reckoning." Penelope looked up in surprise. "My wagon." "But I don't need it anymore, not really." "I thought the same," Daniel said. "But then I remembered all those books you said were in it, your father's collection. The farmer says most of the contents were still inside when he bought it. He just wanted the wagon itself." "My father's books." Penelope's voice quavered with emotion. Those books had been precious to her father, collected over a lifetime of scholarly pursuit. She had mourned their loss almost as much as the personal mementos. "If you want them back, I can arrange it," Sheriff Tanner offered. "I'm heading to Sacramento next week for the Barrett trial." "Yes, please," Penelope said without hesitation, "and thank the farmer for his honesty." After the sheriff departed with the necessary funds, Daniel helped Penelope finish harvesting the tomatoes. As they worked side by side in the late afternoon sunshine, Penelope found herself overwhelmed by how completely her fortunes had changed. "I keep thinking I must be dreaming," she confessed as they carried baskets of vegetables to the cabin. 6 months ago, I was standing on that road watching everything disappear. Now I have my orchard, this home, my mother's ring back, soon my father's books and you." She looked at Daniel, her eyes shining. "Especially you." Daniel set down his basket and took her in his arms. "Not a dream, Penny. Just life taking unexpected turns." "Very unexpected," she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. "When you found me on that road, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Daniel smiled against her lips. "Can't say I did, but I knew there was something special about you from the first moment. The way you stood there, looking more angry than afraid despite having just lost everything." "I was afraid," Penelope admitted, "but not of the thieves. I was afraid of failing before I'd even started, of having to return to Boston defeated." "Never that," Daniel said firmly. "You're the most determined woman I've ever met. Even without my help, you'd have found a way." "Perhaps," Penelope conceded, "but I'm glad I didn't have to." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirl of preparations. The women of the community rallied around Penelope, helping to sew a simple but elegant wedding dress and preparing food for the celebration. Daniel and his neighbors worked together to begin expanding her cabin, adding a larger bedroom and improving the kitchen area. Sheriff Tanner returned from Sacramento with not only the promised books, but also a few more personal items that had been recovered. Seeing her father's beloved botanical volumes again brought Penelope to tears, and she spent an evening showing Daniel her favorites, explaining the careful notes her father had made in the margins and the knowledge contained within their pages. "These will help the orchard thrive," she told him, running her fingers reverently over the worn leather bindings. "And someday we can pass them down to our children." Daniel's expression softened at the mention of future children. "Our children," he repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect October day with crisp air and golden sunshine. Penelope dressed in Martha Ellis's spare bedroom, the older woman helping to arrange her hair and veil. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Daniel won't know what hit him." Penelope smiled nervously, smoothing the skirt of her dress, ivory silk that Martha had preserved from her own daughter's wedding, altered to fit Penelope's slender frame. "I still can't believe this is happening, that I found him, that he loves me." "Some things are meant to be," Martha said with certainty. "The two of you, that was written in the stars long before you ever laid eyes on each other." The ceremony took place at the church in Santa Rosa, filled to capacity with well-wishers from throughout the community. Robbie, standing proudly beside his brother, grinned from ear to ear as Penelope walked down the aisle on Ellis's arm, the older man having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Daniel's face when he saw her was everything Penelope could have hoped for. Wonder, joy, and love mingled in his expression as she approached. When Ellis placed her hand in Daniel's, she felt the slight tremble in his fingers and squeezed gently in reassurance. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Penelope felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, beside this man, in this community, building a life from the ground up just as she was nurturing her young orchard. The vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken clearly despite the emotion evident in both their voices. When Daniel slipped her mother's recovered ring onto her finger alongside his grandmother's engagement ring, Penelope felt as if her parents were somehow present, blessing this new chapter in her life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Daniel's kiss was tender yet full of promise, and the cheers of the congregation echoed around them as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Yates. The celebration afterward spilled out from the church onto the town square, with tables laden with food, musicians playing lively tunes, and children running and playing between the adults. As afternoon turned to evening, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Daniel kept Penelope close by his side, his pride evident in the way he introduced her as "my wife" to anyone who hadn't yet offered congratulations. Robbie flitted between them and his friends, occasionally returning to hug Penelope and call her Mrs. Yates with delighted emphasis. As the night progressed, Daniel led Penelope away from the crowd for a moment of quiet together. They walked to the edge of the square where they could still hear the music but were somewhat removed from the celebration. "Happy, Mrs. Yates?" Daniel asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," Penelope replied, resting her head against his chest. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "When my father died, I thought my life was set just the ranch, taking care of Robbie growing old alone. Then you appeared on that road and everything changed." "Sometimes losing what you have makes room for something better," Penelope mused, echoing her earlier sentiment. "Those thieves did me a favor," Daniel agreed with a chuckle, "though don't tell them that at their trial." Penelope laughed, then grew more serious. "I thought I needed all those things in my wagon to build a new life, but what I really needed was a place to belong, people who cared about me. You gave me that, Daniel, from the moment you said what's mine is yours." "And I meant it," Daniel said softly. "Everything I have, everything I am, it's yours, Penny, always." As the first year of their marriage unfolded, Penelope and Daniel settled into a rhythm that balanced work on both properties. The expanded cabin on Penelope's land became their primary home, with frequent stays at the ranch when ranch work demanded it. Robbie thrived under Penelope's guidance, his natural intelligence flourishing with access to her father's books and her patient teaching. The orchard grew steadily, each sapling carefully tended and monitored. Daniel built a small nursery structure where Penelope could start new varieties from cuttings and experiment with cross-pollination techniques she'd learned from her father's research. By the following spring, Penelope had more news to share. On a quiet evening as they sat together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, she took Daniel's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll have more than saplings to tend this year," she said softly. Daniel's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as her meaning became clear. "A baby, we're having a baby," Penelope nodded, her eyes shining with happy tears, "due in the fall around our anniversary." Daniel gathered her into a gentle embrace, his joy evident in every line of his body. "A child," he whispered against her hair, "our child. The first of our own orchard," Penelope said with a smile, using the metaphor that had become meaningful to them both. When they shared the news with Robbie the next day, the boy's excitement knew no bounds. At 13, he was old enough to understand the significance and immediately began planning all the things he would teach his new sibling. "I'll be the best big brother ever," he declared. "I'll show the baby all about the ranch and the orchard and everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer months. Penelope continued to work in her garden and orchard, though Daniel insisted she leave the heavier tasks to him and Robbie. The community rallied around them once again, with neighboring women bringing gifts for the baby and offering advice and support. As Penelope's due date approached, Martha Ellis moved temporarily into the guest room they had added to the cabin, her experience as a midwife proving invaluable when Penelope went into labor 2 weeks early. After a long night and difficult delivery, their son was born just as dawn broke over the orchard, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair like his mother's. They named him Joseph Thomas Yates, after both their fathers. Holding his son for the first time, Daniel looked at Penelope with such profound love that words seemed unnecessary. In that moment, the family they had created together, Daniel, Penelope, Robbie, and now little Joseph, felt complete and perfect. As autumn turned to winter, the Yates family settled into their new routine. Joseph proved to be a good-natured baby, filling their days with joy and their nights with occasional exhaustion. Robbie took his role as big brother seriously, reading to the baby from Penelope's books and helping whenever he could. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside the cabin windows, they gathered around the fireplace in their cozy home. Joseph slept peacefully in his cradle. Robbie dozed on the hearth rug with a new book beside him, and Daniel and Penelope sat close together on the small sofa, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "I have something for you," Daniel said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Penelope unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver locket. Opening it, she found a tiny portrait of their family Daniel, herself, Robbie, and baby Joseph painted by a traveling artist who had passed through Santa Rosa the previous month. "Daniel, it's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the miniature faces with her fingertip. "I wanted you to have something that shows what we've built together," he explained. "A year ago, we were just starting our life together. Now look at us." Penelope leaned into him, her heart full. "From one stolen wagon to all of this," she marveled. "Who would have thought?" "I knew from the moment I saw you standing on that road," Daniel said, tightening his arm around her shoulders. "Something told me you were going to change my life." "For the better, I hope," Penelope teased gently. "For the better in every way," Daniel confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What's mine is yours, Penny, and what we've built together is more than either of us could have created alone." As the fire crackled and the snow continued to fall, blanketing their orchard in pristine white, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The theft that had seemed like the end of her dreams had instead been the beginning of something far more precious than anything she had packed in that wagon. In losing everything, she had found everything that truly mattered: love, family, community, and a place to put down roots as deep and enduring as the trees in her orchard. What had started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy's generous offer on a dusty California road, had grown into a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Outside, the young orchard waited patiently beneath its blanket of snow, promising future harvests and years of growth, a fitting metaphor for the family sheltered within the warm cabin, their own story just beginning to unfold in the rich soil of love and shared dreams. As the years passed, the Yates orchard flourished, becoming known throughout the region for its variety and quality. Penelope's scientific approach, combined with Daniel's practical farming knowledge, created a unique and successful enterprise. They added more land, expanding both the orchard and the ranch, creating a legacy for their children. Joseph grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who inherited his mother's love of books and his father's steady nature. Robbie, at 18, chose to attend college in San Francisco, studying agriculture with the intention of bringing new techniques back to the family business. And when their daughter, Emma, was born 3 years after Joseph, the family circle widened again with love and joy. She grew into a spirited girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, equally at home among the fruit trees or riding alongside Daniel on the ranch. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Daniel and Penelope stood together in the center of their orchard, now in full bloom with fragrant white and pink blossoms promising a bountiful harvest. "Remember when all this was just a dream?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out over what they had built together. "And a few saplings," Penelope added with a smile. "Now look at it." The orchard stretched before them, row upon row of healthy trees, some already bearing fruit, others still maturing. Beyond it, they could see their expanded home, smoke rising from the chimney where Martha Ellis, now a permanent resident in her own attached suite, was likely preparing dinner for the children. "We've been blessed," Daniel said softly. "We have," Penelope agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That day when my wagon was stolen, I thought it was the worst day of my life. I had no idea it would lead to the best." Daniel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years of laughter and sun, but his gaze held the same warmth and strength that had first captured her heart. "What's mine is yours," he said, repeating the words that had become something of a family motto. "From that first day until forever." "And what's yours is mine," Penelope replied, stretching up to kiss the man who had helped her turn loss into abundance, sorrow into joy, and a stolen wagon into a life overflowing with love. In the distance, they heard their children's laughter as Joseph and Emma raced toward them through the orchard, their faces bright with the simple joy of spring and family and home. And Penelope knew with absolute certainty that no wagon, no matter how full of treasures, could have given her what she had found instead, a love that had taken root and grown into something as enduring as the trees that surrounded them, bearing fruit season after season in the rich soil of the life they had created together.